Yeah, consciousness is the capacity of one, the totality of what exists, to know itself. So it's the capacity to know by self-reflection. But the interesting thing in the way I look at this is that when one wants to know itself, and in fact, we need to start with a postulate, because otherwise we run around this thing and we never get to it. So the postulate that I'm using is one is the totality of what exists, what potentially can exist, and what actually exists. And I make a clear distinction because you cannot get something from nothing. You know, many theories of reality starts with nothing and you get something. I do not believe that that's correct. You have to start with some potentiality that becomes actuality. So when one is holistic, meaning is not made of separable part. Everything is interconnected within one. I mean, this is, goes back to the Vedas. I mean, but it was very clear to me that that lack of separation was fundamental in my first experience, the awakening experience. I was not separate. I was the observer and the observed. There is no separation between the two. But that's also what quantum physics is saying. There is no observer separate from what is observed. Okay? Quantum physics is very clear about that. So one is holistic, one is dynamic. It's never the same instant after instant. Is always changing. So far, I have described quantum physics, what quantum physics says, not classical physics, quantum physics. And then I'm adding, one wants to know itself. And it is in this one wants to know itself that there is the joining of physics and spirituality. It is the knowing itself. Okay, so if you believe that one is to know itself, then one cannot be omniscient, because otherwise it would know everything already. And there would be no evolution, we wouldn't be here, certainly. So one wants to know itself means that one will have to continue to know itself, because we know within ourselves that the more you know, the more there is to know, because the more connections between what we have known exist. And so there is an explosion of self-knowing that can occur. So, but one, if you start with this point, then when one knows itself, he has to bring into existence what he knows. It comes from potential existence, like the unconscious of one, into manifestation, which is existence. Is from a potentiality which is neither a wave nor a particle yet. It is even before you can even imagine what it is, to an existence. But the existence that, so what happens is that knowing and existing are two aspects of the same thing. Knowing and existing are two faces of the same coin. Because so when one knows itself, it brings into existence a part whole of itself. Because being holistic, it cannot know itself only partially. It has to know itself completely. But it has to know itself with a particular point of view. That was very clear to me 8 years ago. It has to know itself in a point of view, like a perspective. But one has many perspectives in which it can know itself. So now there can be many perspectives in which one knows itself completely. And so it brings into existence a part whole, which I call consciousness unit, is like the monad of Leibniz. The monads of Leibniz are very similar concepts. Leibniz is the only philosopher and scientist and mathematician that I know of that actually understood the concept. This is what I'm talking about. And I found it out later, but to me that was clear that it had to be something like that, based on my experiences. Because in my 20 years where I was exploring consciousness, I had hundreds of different extraordinary experiences of consciousness. They reveal aspects of consciousness that were certainly not, they were coherent with the awakening experiences that I described, but they illuminated different parts of this spectrum of capacities that consciousness has. So if we start there, then one wants to know itself. Then the wanting to know itself is the will, the free will of one. One decides which way to know itself. That's free will. The essence of free will is the capacity of one to direct his own knowing, self-knowing, which is also the capacity that we have. That's what free will is for us. And the capacity to know itself is consciousness. So now we have defined free will and consciousness. And the two must work together. You cannot have consciousness without free will. It would be like you know something, but you cannot do anything about it. You know what you want, but you cannot act on that desire that you have. It'd be foolish. It would be just the universe would be a joke. Would not be serious, inconsistent. So starting this way, you can unite physics, spirituality. The world now has meaning and purpose. The entire universe has meaning and purpose. The materialism has erased simply by saying everything that exists must be measured. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. How is it possible? Already quantum physics is telling you that a particle that is not looked at is not even in space and time. You can only be described in a deeper reality, and only when you measure it. In other words, when a field interacts with another field, which is the field of an instrument, you have an event that manifests in space and time. And then you can say, there is a particle here, for example. But quantum physics cannot tell you where you will find the particle. It can only tell you the probability of all the possibilities in which you could potentially find the particle. So there you go again. Okay, quantum physics is not describing reality. It's only describing what you can know about reality. Big difference. And probabilities have to do with consciousness. A classical system, a computer, in a computer there are no probabilities. They are all certainties. This next state of the computer is determined by the previous state, period. So a computer can never be conscious because it doesn't have the characteristics of free will.